Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask a Pianist. My name is Andrew Aarons, and today we'll be considering an acoustical problem which, though on the surface seems obvious, is of significant importance to pianists in nearly every aspect of performance. When we use a piano to make music, we're essentially controlling the intensity, tone color or quality, and duration of notes. Once the note is played, our control of the note in terms of sound quality diminishes significantly. What this really means is that by controlling the impact of the hammer, we set into motion a collection of variables that predetermines how the note will decay. But during this decay, there are very few things that we can do additionally at the keyboard to influence these variables. This, in some ways, is a good thing. With reliable and predictable decay rates, we can focus our attention to playing lots of notes or voices simultaneously and not worry about them resonating according to plan. But this is usually where our attention stops, and we must constantly remind ourselves to keep listening to the resonances even after we've played them and moved on to other notes. Today's episode is going to focus on this issue. In Messiaen's sixth prelude, we find ourselves in an interesting and rather unique resonance space. There are no explicit pedal markings in this opening, but the held notes in the score require the use of the damper pedal in order to be rhythmically correct, and thus we are forced into creating this super resonant sound world. For the bars of resonance suspension, Messiaen gives us two loud chords to set the resonance and many soft chords to play within that sound field. This sequence is a wonderful study for pianists to learn how to listen to sounds that are already set in motion, and how to play effectively within these resonant spaces without either disrupting them completely or overcompensating to the point of disappearance within them. Before we get into that matter, however, let's consider for a moment what problems we immediately encounter in a passage like this. Messiaen gives us two chords in forte to set the resonance. Given that the two chords are not consonant in the traditional sense, we have to make decisions regarding how much we want to exaggerate the dissonance that exists between them. If we want the resonance to sound blendable and massive, then we use a rather rich sound quality in addition to de-emphasizing the close note dissonances like the D and D flat pairing, and the G and A flat pairing. In other words, we don't emphasize these notes, but rather we voice the chord to the notes that are similar. If, however, we want the resonance to sound complex and purposefully dissonant, we do the opposite. Play with a percussive tone quality and voice the chords to the dissonant note pairings. The choice of creating a resonance field that is easy to blend into, as opposed to one that has lots of interference in the sound due to the dissonance, is a choice that has direct consequences on how we play the material afterward, and thus this choice requires some planning and thought. A good portion of the interpretational choices we make are directly dependent upon the structural requirements of the piece we're performing. But these choices must also be weighed against the acoustic requirements of the instrument or performance space. And unlike the structure of a piece, which never changes, the hall in which one performs, or the piano that we play, changes from concert to concert, and thus it becomes a balancing act in order to maintain a consistent and cohesive interpretation whilst taking into account new on-the-spot performance potentials. In other words, we can create a musical interpretation that is well integrated and thought out in the musical vacuum of a practice room, but when this interpretation is presented on stage, we are usually forced to modify our choices so as to take into account the new acoustic requirements that an audience in a hall may need. This is especially important when it comes to resonance fields, because the acoustic result is far less flexible and adaptable than other elements of interpretation like tempo, dynamics, or sound color. When we produce a resonance field, we are restricted in many ways from interfering with it or changing it during the decay, and thus it represents an additional hard line, like the acoustic space or piano, that must be adapted to rather than adapted with. In terms of principle, dissonant resonance spaces work better for shorter situations in time, whereas resonances which allow easy blending of new notes tend to work better for longer held situations. If I play this section percussively in order to bring out the dissonances within the sound field, then I will create a sound that will necessarily decay faster than normal. This is an automatic result of using a percussive sound quality, and the advantages are clear. The texture is transparent, and all the notes can be heard. If, on the other hand, I play this section with a full non-percussive sound, then the field will be blendable, but it will also automatically last longer in terms of decay rate. There are advantages here too, of course. The resonances sound full and majestic, the soft chords complement rather than contrast with the resonance space, and if I choose to, I could play this section much slower and still achieve the same effect because the sound doesn't decay as fast. All of this is irrespective of the piano I'm playing on, the hall I'm playing in, and of course the tempo and character requirements of the piece. Once we understand these effects, then we can integrate them into our interpretation to best suit our intentions. There is a sequence after the introduction where Messiaen creates different fields, one after another. The initiating chords for the resonances form a kind of harmonic progression. If I wanted my interpretation to focus on this progression, then in terms of tempo, I'd probably play this slightly fast to link the segments together acoustically. If this is played fast, then a long resonance decay is not ideal because the impression a listener will get is one of haste. The chords will appear to trip over each other because they haven't had enough time to decay. In order to link the segments, I'd have to choose a sound quality that is more percussive, so that there is a fast decay. This is not about playing the sequence softer or louder. It's solely about adjusting your sound quality to suit the resonance requirements of the tempo you set. If I wanted this sequence to focus on individual segments, without a connection between them, then I'd consider playing this slightly slower. To use a percussive sound quality here would exaggerate the impression of these segments being separate entities, and possibly go overboard by making it sound empty. In order to make this situation work more effectively, we can use a non-percussive sound quality for the sequence. This will do a few things to it. The sound will resonate for longer, thus making the allowance for the slower tempo, and the sound quality of the beginning resonance will allow us more room for control in terms of what sound quality we use for the short chords. In principle, when we produce sounds in a resonance space, there are certain rules which we learn about what to do and what not to do with our sounds, and this usually develops through trial and error, only to manifest itself in our playing instinct rather than rational thought. In the same way that using the damper pedal becomes something of a direct connection to our ears, rather than consciously thinking, I need to use more pedal here, the changes we make to our sound quality during performance also eventually fall under the same direct connection. When we're playing underneath an already existing resonant space, there is a rule which is important to understand. If we begin with a percussive sound quality and change over to a non-percussive or blendable one, the auditory effect is one of decrescendo and ritardando, irrespective of if we changed our dynamics or tempo. If, however, we start with a non-percussive sound quality and switch over to a percussive sound quality, the music will sound louder and faster to the audience. This is caused by our perception of empty space within the music. If we can hear spaces between notes and chords, or areas where no new sound is being created, then each sound after the space appears more complex to the ear. This difference allows us to customize how the piece is perceived, and, in a sense, allows us to control and contour the piece according to how we interpret Messiaen's harmonic language. For instance, in my view, the opening is simply an announcement to the audience, and the function of the resonance space is solely to establish a memorable pattern which the audience can recognize and relate to when it appears again. Because of this function, I choose to maintain a strict tempo with a slightly percussive sound quality to emphasize the dissonances created in the sound field. The second time this sound field is created, it is actually part of an harmonic sequence. This sequence leads to a final point in the phrase. Due to this function of being a part of a larger whole, I approach this sequence differently than the opening solo situation. I start with the same percussive sound quality as before, to add a familiar feeling for the audience, while gradually becoming less percussive as the harmonic sequence develops. This resonant space occurs one more time in full, leading to a forte fortissimo pause. In order to create the sound wall that Messiaen appears to ask for, I grade the percussiveness and lack thereof backwards, charting it from the end to the beginning. In other words, at the forte fortissimo pause, I want to have as little percussion as possible, and at the beginning of the development, I want as much percussion in the sound as possible. Here's what it sounds like. This is simply to establish a baseline of interpretation in terms of what we want our chord resonance sections to sound like on the grand scale. But this doesn't address the primary concern I brought up in the introduction to this episode. It's very easy to play the loud resonance chords in the bass and not think about how the upper soft chords integrate with the rest of the sound. Due to the construction, the upper soft chords will resonate regardless of what we do with them, and they will always be audible to the audience due to the shift in register. In other words, this distinction between the loud and soft chords is one that is automatically achieved regardless of the quality of our technique. But I maintain that it's necessary to take the next step and think carefully about what kind of integration or non-integration you would like to have between these loud and soft chords. Are they to blend together? Are they to stand out from each other? Should we aim for a halfway point? Do the loud chords affect how the soft chords resonate, and vice versa? Lots of questions and many complex answers. Let's take the first instance. If we stay with our current interpretation, then we'll use a slightly percussive sound quality to emphasize the dissonance in the loud chords that set the resonance. The upper chords now have to contend with a sound field that is reasonably transparent and also quick to decay. This means that the upper chords will be easily heard to the audience no matter how softly they are played. Due to the transparent resonance, we can even go as far as playing the upper chords legato, and they'll still ring out. This determination of what we can do is only the first step, and it requires experimentation to see what effects one can achieve reliably. The second step involves taking into account how these two sets of resonance interact in real time. In other words, the first loud resonance is set, and the soft chords that come after interfere with the first sound field. Where do we begin? The loud chords decay at a reasonably predictable rate if we play them the same way every time we perform. The upper chords interfere with this decay, sometimes amplifying certain notes or resonances over others, and sometimes appearing to dampen sounds. Normally, we wouldn't notice this at all, because our attention as pianists is to the notes we are going to play, not the notes that we've already played. But in this case, it's very important to listen to the resonance that has been created, because now, with the soft chords, we are playing inside this resonance. If we want to keep the two gestures separate, then it's quite easy. We play the top soft chords whilst ignoring entirely the resonance that we've created before with the low ones. If, however, we want to blend the two together, then we can achieve this by shaping and contouring the top soft chords according to the decay rate of the loud low chords. In other words, the dynamic differential between the set resonance and the new chords stays constant as the resonance decays. But this effect can only be achieved if we are listening to the decay of the initial strike whilst still controlling the new chords we are playing inside the sound. It's like playing chamber music with yourself. Obviously, this is one possible solution to one problem, but I think the important idea to take from this is that we as pianists must develop the skill of using an already existing and decaying resonance as a frame of reference for producing new sounds. We do this on the micro level when we are playing a long legato phrase in Chopin or Rachmaninoff, or when we are voicing carefully in a fugue. But for the most part, the effect is limited to 1 or 2 notes at a time, and not a sound field of 8 or 10 dissonant notes over the course of an entire bar. In many ways, this enhanced listening is a necessity in most if not all piano works. Messiaen only shines a spotlight on the problem. So, that's it for this episode of Ask a Pianist. Until next time, keep practicing, and take some time to listen to the sounds that you've produced and how they interact with the new ones you're making. I guarantee that this will help you to refine your playing so that you are no longer simply initiating notes at the right time, but you begin to see yourself as a sculptor of sound. Bye for now.